Friends, it's a great honor to introduce you to someone who's mastered the art of being awesome, Chief Nick Willard.
Like, that's really unnecessary. Sit down. But I know I do appreciate it. My wife's here, so she's going to think it's kind of cool. Because she thinks I'm a horrible human being. Before I start, some housekeeping. The reason for the beard is that we're doing a campaign for another child advocacy, the Child Advocacy Center. So I want to let you know that that's why I look so scruffy. So it's interesting. I kind of have all these institutions for children. I do Beards for Bucks for the CAC. I'm on the board of directors for CASA. And all I get out of Child and Family Services is a friendship with Bois. A man I absolutely adore. And one thing before I start, and I don't typically do prepared remarks because I'm not good at it. I like to just kind of wing it. But I thought this occasion deserved me to give some thought to what I had to say. But before I start, we created a thing called ACER, the Adverse Child Experience Response Team. So when a child experiences trauma in the home, whether it's violence, whether it's an overdose, we get that child service in real time. Sometimes the response team is out there and they respond in real time once the situation is safe. And if the officers are not out there as part of the team, we circle back with a juvenile advocate that we put on almost 2 years ago. So if I could get a round of applause for the two people that are instrumental for bringing this idea forward and for creating a model that is now being not just utilized across the United States, but the countries in Europe have come and visited us to emulate it. So if I get a round of applause for Captain Sean Layton and Lieutenant Nicole Ledoux. So I have the creamy center, but it's these guys that really turn the nuts and bolts, and that I'm just honored to be working with you guys as colleagues. So thank you, my good friend Borja, for asking me to speak to your Child Family Services 2017 annual celebration. For the most awesome people on earth, our kids. And good evening to all of you. This room is filled with amazing people, caregivers in every sense. You care, so you give. You give of yourself through your love, your passion, and your commitment for the betterment and protection of children. I am honored to have been asked to stand before each and every one of you in this room and offer my thoughts about our shared dedication to change the trajectory of the lives of children in hopes that we change that trajectory significantly enough so the outcomes we hope for are realized. A stable, nurturing life filled with love, support, and direction. It's an awesome desire. Not easy to change the life of a child when a child's life is too terrifying for even most people to imagine. Ask yourself this: how many people in your life have said, you can't change every child's life? You can't save every child. Chief, you can't take every child home with you. And even though those sentiments are meant to save us from ourselves, we soldier on, undeterred, knowing the truth of the matter. Indeed, we can't save every child. We can't take every child home with us. But we can certainly hold within our hearts a desire to do both, forever and always. It's in our desire to protect children that draws us to such work. It draws us to put the most precious and vulnerable among us before ourselves. I'd like to begin with a short story of a boy lost in the abyss of neglect, abuse, and abject poverty. A boy, through no fault of his own, was born into a life he would never wish upon himself or for anyone else for that matter, but one that he had to accept. He had no choice. A boy who on many occasions was left to his own druthers for as long as he could remember, learning to navigate life with little nurturing or direction. How many of you in this room know a child like that? This boy accepted his life. He had to. but he did so with incredible anger, pushing back incessantly against the injustices he saw all around him. When his alcoholic father would beat his mother, he tried to stop it, each and every time, only to suffer the same fate. The insults hurled at the boy by his father were far more harmful than the smacks or the backhands he received. After a while, and so many beatings, the boy began to believe his father's words. He was worthless. He would never amount to anything. He was weak. The boy's perceptive nature fueled his anger, but it also contributed to a level of shame, deep-rooted shame. When police officers would go to his house for a domestic violence call, the boy would see that the officers, as they told his father to walk it off, while telling his mother if she would stop upsetting your husband, you wouldn't get hit. All the while, a second officer would line up the 7 kids on a couch and stand over them with contempt. Contempt in his body language, contempt in his voice. Often, the boy's head would be swollen or his lip would be bloodied, and neither officer would ask him how he received his injuries. Many times, the children would hear a police officer say something to the effect of, "These kids don't stand a chance." As the boy grew, his anger intensified towards cops, and his view of police officers revealed itself during any police encounter. The boy was disrespectful, uncooperative, and verbally combative. The cops didn't like the boy, and the boy didn't like the cops. When food in his home was scarce at the end of the month, the boy would learn how to navigate the hunger, would learn how to navigate his hunger and adapt with a crafty intuitiveness. He would devour every school breakfast and every school lunch while bartering for other kids' lunch so he could eat it for supper that night. He suffered the indignity and the shame, as he perceived it anyways, by wearing his new school clothes that he picked out of cardboard boxes at St. Christopher's Church, only to have older kids poke fun at him at school because they were their clothes, donations, hand-me-downs. The boy always fought back against such ridicule. In fact, he would fight at every turn. Every slight ended in a dust-up. One time, when an older boy was making fun of him his first day of school because the boy was wearing that boy's shirt from the previous year, the boy decided he was going to square up and fight. The older boy said, "Don't do it. This is going to end bad for you." And the boy said, "There's no way you can hit harder than my father." But he lost that fight. He actually never had a chance. The boy would grow up with many influences that contributed to his development. Influences even he didn't recognize how impactful they were. But the fact that they existed at all had greater value than anyone could have considered. He was a lost child after all, a throwaway kid. A school teacher here, a coach there, a social worker's counsel, or a police officer's stern talk. The boy learned more lessons than he had realized, and he did so in spite of himself, in spite of his anger, in spite of his shame. He learned, he adapted. He knew he needed to, for he was a fighter in every sense. He would learn to sidestep a punch, to counter punch when needed, but most importantly, to stand back up after being knocked down and learning not to get knocked back down for the same reason. Overcoming poverty, neglect, abuse, and most importantly than anything else, those emotional scars, shame, anger, and self-loathing, is impossible without support of a caring adult somewhere along the line. And yet, those very indicators, when left to their own devices, see boys like him who live such life circumstances, usually in prison, prone to family violence, or far too often to addiction. This does not have to be where this boy's story ends. Together with early intervention and education, through the everyday and constant influences of the Boys and Girls Club, the YWCA, the YMCA, teachers, coaches, and even a police officer. Yep, even a police officer. The boy's life can be different. And how do I know this? I know this because this boy is me. boy who started his life in abject poverty and who was subjected to violence, the boy who loathed authority in the very sight of a police officer, grew up to honorably serve his country in the United States military and become a chief of police. I learned to reconcile, forgive, and feel unwavering love for my father. And now I proudly serve my community every day. Indeed, I am humble and thankful to stand before people like you tonight. It's because of the love, care, and simple acts of nurturing kindness of people like each of you that saved little boys like me. Boys who grew up to become men, men who may well become police chiefs, men who want nothing more than to give everything of themselves for the betterment of kids. Kids like that little boy, kids like me. Indeed, it takes all of us to change the trajectory of a child in the grips of hardship. No matter how seemingly insignificant it is, or whether we can realize our influence as it's happening, our efforts alone, singularly or commingled, could change a life. In our persistence and in our call to demand the same of others, our neighbors, our community, our government, we lend a strong voice for children who unfortunately have no voice in their own rearing. I've been a copper for 28 years now, and I've seen all manner of depravity to feel as though I am an authority on the issue of victimization and the effects victims suffer when left to the quiet of the mind or circumstance. Like a toddler left alone, isolated, and neglected in its early years, never feeling the needed relief of toxic stress, relief that is needed to flourish and develop. So too is the fate of a victim left to fend for him or herself without advocacy, counseling, or support. They become lost, dependent on negative vices, or they simply give up and let go. It is paramount we intervene in the life of children who are living hardships. Now more than ever, as we are in the throes of an unprecedented opioid pandemic, we need to focus all of our efforts toward our children, like the good doctor said. What does that look like? Children who are living with addiction in their home, what does that look like? Oftentimes, it are children taking care of themselves, perhaps children taking care of siblings, children witnessing overdoses in their home. Some of those overdoses are fatal. Some children are now left with a single parent. Other children are left with no parent at all. Too many of our children are being raised by their grandparents or in foster care because mom, dad, or both have succumbed to the disease of addiction. Addiction that changes everything about those addicted. Nothing is more important than getting high. Not family, not friends, not even their very own children. Everything is second to the drug. Life in of itself has no value, and for many of them, it has even less. 2 weeks ago, I stopped by the Pakavani school, and I put it on my Twitter page, so maybe he saw that. I stopped by Pakavani Elementary School for lunch and recess. A teacher asked me to meet a third grader who wanted to say something to me. I greeted the boy with my big toothy smile, and I grabbed his hand. The boy looked me dead in the eye and said, my mother told me the police are really bad. Instinctively, I released his hand and I dropped to a knee to get to his level. I said, well, tell me why. And he said, my mom did lots of drugs. She used to hide me in the closet from the police. He continued, you could see my ribs and everything because I didn't get much to eat, but the police found me. They found you, I asked? Yes, he said, and they were really nice. Before I could choke out a word, he continued, look at me now. I feel really good and I look good too, as he brushed both sides of his hands down his torso to show me that his ribs are no longer visible. I told him how proud I was of him and asked him if he liked police officers, in which he said, yes, that's why I wanted to say hi to you. Choking back tears, I asked him his name, and he said with a big smile that was like Broadway, my name is Ian. And I said, I'm Nick, as I shook his hand more. Hi, Officer Nick, he shouted. And as quick as the moment occurred, it was gone, leaving me rattled. Thinking of my experiences in life and in this profession, it's weird to think that I can be rattled by that moment. I ask myself why. And even I need to make sense of how I feel in such moments. Because it's like all of you, I never lose sight of every kid, of every story, of every dire circumstance for which kids are subjected to. As a community, I dare say as our society, we are in the most troubling of times in this drug crisis. Our children are, on many levels, the forgotten ones. Our children are, as I've said, they see their parents or hear of their friends or parents overdosing or even dying, only to be shuffled off to grandparents, relatives, or foster care. Or even worse, left to their druthers in this safety plan cooked up by a system where strained caseloads or dollars have greater value than the safety, security, and sheer brilliance of a child. We need to commit ourselves to children at the very earliest of ages. The great work being done by Spark, New Hampshire shows us that effective early childhood programs and services can protect against a range of problems later in life, including substance misuse. In addition to buffering toxic stress, early childhood programs only help to link children to the services they need and their families. We need to put the same effort into children at the very earliest of their development as we do to those addicted adults that seem to be singular in our focus in this drug fight. Children have not had the proper priority in this drug crisis that we find ourselves in, but they damn well need to be. When I am asked, Chief, where should we be putting the money? I don't say law enforcement. I don't say treatment and recovery. I say give the money to those organizations who champion the rights and protection of children. I'll be frank. I'm usually not. I've become somewhat cynical, and that I feel in spite of our heartfelt efforts, we are making little difference in stemming overdoses or shrinking the addiction pool. And if making little difference continues, then we may well have a generation that will be lost to this drug crisis. So we need to save the next generation from befalling the same fate. The vision of Child and Family Services is that every child will flourish in a healthy, nurturing, self-sufficient family supported by an involved community. It is our collective responsibility as an involved community to have such a shared vision as Child and Family Services, while contributing whatever resources we have at our disposal in the protection of children. One of the many values Child and Family Services is that every child and youth is entitled to nurturance, protection, and a chance to develop his or her full human potential and opportunities to contribute to the greater good. It is the protection piece that is of most importance to me as a police chief. For a family cannot be a family if its children are neglected, abused, or are being raised in an unhealthy environment. We need to pour even greater resources into early childhood intervention while continuing to recognize that it takes all of us and our different disciplines to ensure their protection moving forward. The police and DCYF must identify children in need and see to their protection and ensure their safety. Children need and deserve justice, but it must be done in a compassionate way, such as the healing and nurturing manner in which Child Advocacy Center, the CAC, provides such services for kids. Children need to have a voice through advocacy as provided by the court-appointed special advocates, CASA, dedicated volunteers who defend the rights of children, giving them a voice they would not otherwise have. And in doing so, may be the most important factor in changing a child's trajectory from the depths of despair to a loving and nurturing home. Children need to live in a healthy, nurturing, self-sufficient family, the hallmark of Child and Family Services, dedicated to advancing the well-being of children by providing an array of social services to strengthen family life. In closing, we are all connected, one community with one goal, to protect, enrich, and nurture children. Remember who we are all working for. We are working for the most awesome people on earth, our kids. Thank you.